When people consider moving to the Sunshine Coast, one of the first obstacles they run into is relying on a ferry to connect them to the rest of BC. We're going to talk about our experience with BC ferries and whether relying on a ferry service is a deal breaker or not.
We've lived on the coast for about 11 years and we thought we would use the ferry a lot, but the reality is, how much have we used the ferry?
I think just a handful of times a year. Like we'll go into the city to go to the airport or to go to doctor's appointments. But as far as like really shopping, we do most of our shopping on the Sunshine Coast. So there's, initially we thought we would, I think we kept our Costco card for like a year, maybe a year or two. And then after that, we're like, it's not really worth it to just go there just to save a few dollars here and there and use all day. And we just didn't pair it with doing other things into the city.
When we first moved, we were living in a city and we moved here and we thought maybe moving to a small town will be a bit of an adjustment. So we told ourselves, you know what, Vancouver's right there. We can just hop on the ferry and whenever we want to do city things, we can just go to Vancouver and we won't miss the city at all. And the truth of it is, like, you know, quote unquote fun trips that we've gone to the city for no reason other than to go to a city. I think in like 11 years, we've gone like 5, 6, 7 times. Like it's not very often we go. There's always a purpose for us to go. And I don't know about you, but I personally don't feel like I miss the city at all.
No, I don't miss the traffic. I'm like, let's get back to the coast. Are we done yet?
Yeah, and like there's lots to do here. So for us anyway, you know, like we don't really care to go to a Canucks game or to like a big concert or any of those things. I feel like we're very well occupied here on the coast. Mm-hmm. And yeah, like you said, we do all of our shopping. So outside of, the occasional trip or some kind of appointment, we don't hit the city very often. We've articulated why we don't use the ferry that much or why we don't rely on that much. But what about other people? Everybody is not us. So how much do other coasters rely on the ferry?
I think quite a bit more than us for the most part. So younger families, if their kids are in sports, they'll be going across somewhat regularly. Obviously, the workers, some commuters, they'll be going 5 days a week or maybe just part-time that they have to go into the office. So they have to commit to 2-3 days a week of going in. And I think, people will do events, sports stuff, probably a little bit more often than us. So, I think in general, people use the ferry more than we do, quite a bit more. But then there's also maybe a demographic that doesn't as well, just like us.
We don't have any family in Vancouver. We don't have any friends in Vancouver. We're from someplace further away. So we never think, oh, let's for the weekend go visit so-and-so or whatever in Vancouver. So then we don't really rely on the ferry for that. But if you're somebody that grew up in the Lower Mainland and you've thought, oh, I'm going to move to the Sunshine Coast for, all of the awesome reasons there's to live here, you might find yourself relying on the ferry more often, either for yourself to take a trip over to the city to see people, or maybe you'll be booking trips for people to come over and see you or waiting at the ferry terminal to pick them up. So kind of our having no strings or no attachments to the area has kind of worked out for us in how much we rely on the ferry. But somebody that's from southern BC probably is going to rely on it more than we do.
Yeah. And then, of course, the health-wise, like sometimes you might go into spurts with your health that a person will go to the ferry more often to see specialists. So if a person has more health issues, then you can expect to use the ferry more often and going over there.
If you find yourself in the group that does make frequent trips to Vancouver and you're riding the ferry frequently, how do you recommend that people handle it or organize their day with the ferry?
Well, first of all, I would get an experience card. So just look on the website and sign up for an experience card. So it's for BC residents and you save on sailings. And so some sailings you save on, some you don't, like depending. But the Sunshine Coast is one of the sailings that you save with having an experience card. Like it might be even up to 20% off. So it's worth it.
It saves 20%. If you're riding it a lot, that's a good way to save a few bucks. We really have got into the habit of making reservations, especially in the summertime. When we first got here in the winter, we could kind of roll up to the ferry and a half hour in advance and get on the boat. But that still does happen, but it's not so reliable anymore that you'll get on it. So we've just made a habit of, if we know we're going, we make a reservation in advance to make sure we've got our spot. But in the summer, that's non-negotiable. You've got to have a reservation in the summer, either leaving the coast or coming to the coast.
If you got to do a 2-3 sailing wait in Langdale or in Horseshoe Bay and you're just on the pavement and in the heat, it's not fun.
It makes for a long day. Mm-hmm. Also, if you, like we were talking about doctor's appointments or treatments or that kind of thing, if you have an appointment at a weird time, you might end up having to take the ferry the day before. I've only had that happen to me once. And I could have asked for them to reschedule it because I needed the ferry, but then that meant waiting days or weeks for my scan. And so they had a slot that I had to be there first thing in the morning. So the night before we took the ferry and got a hotel room and then we're up bright and early. But that's like, once in 10 or 11 years that happened, and we could have worked around it. But that does happen very occasionally. And I think probably the same thing with travel. If we're flying someplace, we go out of our way to book a flight that we don't have to stay in the city overnight. But maybe depending on your destination, maybe there's one flight a day and maybe it leaves at 6 a.m.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then you're going to have to, the day before, go to the city and get a hotel room and get up and go to the ferry first thing in the morning.
And especially with the airport, if you're booking a flight like later in the day, for me, it always has to be after 12 for sure. Because then you got to kind of have an extra ferry time in there, kind of, even though you think one ferry can work, but then if it makes it exactly work for timing, you should probably take an earlier ferry. And then, security, traffic, the bridge is locked up or closed down, like all kinds of things. So give yourself a little bit of time.
There's a lot that can go sideways with the ferry. That if you're trying to make a flight, like it can, the ferry can break down. Somebody on the ferry's car could break down, right? So it has nothing to do with the ferry, just one of those things. You have some kind of a fender bender, an incident at one of the terminals, and then you're slow to get off the ferry. Like there's just all kinds of things that can happen. So planning a trip, like a trip to the airport, like right down to the minute, man, it just is. I've done it a couple times where I'm like, I can make this work. I've got an extra half hour. I can make it work. And one time I got caught in traffic in Stanley Park when I had taken transit, and it was just hammering rain. And then I had to get out and basically walk halfway through Stanley Park, all the way to the SkyTrain terminal. And man, I was just dripping wet by the time I got to the airport, and I should have just left 2 hours earlier and it wouldn't have been the end of the world. I could have stayed dry.
Because you guys were locked up, like no vehicles were moving through
Nothing
Stanley
was moving.
Park.
Yeah, people were walking, that was it. Or if you had a bike, but I had no bike. So it was just the feet in the rain and that was it.
And if there are ferry problems, don't blame BC Ferries. Like, don't get mad at the staff. It's not their fault. Like, they want it to run smoothly too. They want their day to go well. And sometimes it's usually like the vehicles, or obviously the ferries are older, so they can break down, or a vehicle breaking down. So it's not necessarily personally BC Ferries, the staff's fault.
Have patience with them. They're doing everything they can to get you where you're going, and they want to get you there almost as much as you do. They do not want the static. They just want a nice, smooth day that runs to schedule.
Okay, about the TAP form. So if you have an appointment, then you want a TAP form, which is like a pink slip that pays for your ferry and for the patient. So then you don't have to pay, but you need it ahead of time. So if you know you have an appointment in the city, what you can do is you can reserve online, and there's like a TAP option when you reserve. And so then that means that you won't have to pay for your reservation. But you're not necessarily going to have the TAP form right away, because you're probably reserving like a few weeks ahead of time or a month ahead of time for your sailing. And then the week before your appointment, then you call your doctor's office here in Gibsons or in Sechelt, and you say, I'm going into the city this week because I have an appointment with a specialist. So they ask you the specialist and the date, and then they fill out a pink form, and then you go pick it up. So then you go pick it up at the office. And then before you even go to the ferry, you can just call from home, and then there's a little homework you have to do. You have to call a number on the TAP form, and you have to fill out a little bit of information on it. And then you go to Langdale and you bring your pink slip with you. And then in Langdale, you just have to show it. Because you reserved as a TAP form, then you just have to show that form, but you keep it. And then it's on the other side when you come back at Horseshoe Bay that
they actually collect the form from you.
Yeah, because you're paying at that side, so they'll keep the form.
Get in the habit of getting your TAP form in advance from your doctor's office before you leave. When we were newer, I would just assume that every doctor's office or whatever it was, treatment center, would just understand what a pink form, what a TAP form is. And I was spoiled by one doctor that his receptionist was very on the ball. And when we would go see her in North Van, she would have the form like filled out and ready for us to take back. And I just thought that's what it was like all the time. But then if you wind up like, at a hospital or with a doctor that doesn't treat coasters a lot, and you're like, oh, and where do I get a TAP form, a pink form? They just look at you like you've got two heads. Mm-hmm. And I can remember, I think it was maybe even that time that I said we got the room the night before to get a scan, being at the hospital with no ferry form and trying to figure out, like, people just looking at us like we were crazy. So just do yourself a favor and get yourself the TAP form here at home before you go.
Well, and especially if you're going to reserve with it, because you'll need it. If you're going to reserve on this side, you'll need to show that you have it. Sometimes they don't ask for it, but usually they do. One last thing about the reservation is if you're a walk-on passenger, you don't need a reservation. Walk-on, you're pretty much guaranteed to go on. In the summer when they have like buses full of camp kids, like sometimes the ferry will fill up faster, but usually they let the walk-ons on and then they just let less vehicles in because they have a capacity of people that can go on.
I think the whole time we've been here, I've only seen one time that walk-ons have been turned away.
Yeah.
So you're almost guaranteed to get on if you can walk on. If you walk on, then that means you're going to have somebody pick you up at the other side, or you're going to have to take the bus or a cab or something from the ferry terminal and leave your car behind, but it's not the end of the world. If the worst comes to happen and you show up to catch your ferry and the sailing's been canceled, what happens in that case?
The one example we had is the ferry broke down. And so then, they weren't doing the first 2 sailings that morning from both sides. And they didn't know when they would be able to fix whatever the problem was. So they do smaller water taxis. So I think it was like 3 water taxis from Horseshoe Bay or maybe from Gibsons showed up. And you could fit 20 to 30 person per water taxi. And so it was just walk on. And then you can get over on the other side. And so ideally you don't need your vehicle. So what we did is we got away with not using our vehicle that morning, even though we had planned to. But then when we got there, we're like, oh, this is what's happening. So then we parked our vehicle and then walked on.
Kind of last minute made arrangements for a rental car on the other side, took a cab to the rental car and then had the car. So it was a little bit of a schmozzle, but it all got worked out in the end. One thing is if it's canceled like because of weather, then you're just stuck.
Yeah.
There's nothing that can happen.
We don't get that too often. We don't get the big winds coming through Howe Sound. It's if you're crossing an Nanaimo, the Georgia Strait, you'll get a few more cancellations, us barely ever.
Could you live on the coast realistically without commuting back and forth to the city?
Yeah. I mean, I think we basically don't. When you commute less than like 8 times a year, you're basically not commuting.
Yeah. I agree with that. For us, it's very manageable. Like there's specific times where, you just don't have any choice. You're going to the airport, you're going to the doctor, you're whatever that is. But like we had kind of talked about at the start that we in Edmonton, we were big Costco shoppers and we thought we would just carry that over here, but just wasn't worth the hassle to save a couple bucks. So we got rid of that. Like if you've got a career that means you can work locally, that you don't have to go off coast, there's that. Or maybe you travel a lot. So then it's kind of just a trip to the city and then you're gone for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or on a rotation or something. Then I don't think that the ferry is really going to offend you that much. It doesn't put a crimp in our lifestyle at all, relying on the ferry here. Mm-hmm.
2 experiences I didn't like is that we basically, because they shut off buying a ticket to like 10 minutes before the sailing. And so like twice we were like a minute off from getting a ticket and then they shut it down. There's no exception. And so that's so annoying when you wait 2 hours for the next sailing because you missed it by a minute.
My one horror story about that is that I had picked up my mom at the airport and brought her back for a visit. And we were standing in line to pay for a ticket at the kiosk. And the person in front paid for their ticket. And then they were standing there counting their change and tucking it away neatly into their wallet. And in that like 30 seconds it took for that to happen, they closed sales on the sailing. And you can beg, you can plead. It doesn't matter what you do. It's not the person at the counter that does it. The system shuts you out. Yeah. So that is pretty insulting when that happens. I think we've each had it happen to us once. So typically it's not something you really need to worry too much about. I think the takeaways from this is if we were going to recap, it's like get a reservation.
Yeah.
Don't screw around with that. If you have someplace you have to be on the other side, then give yourself a little bit of wiggle room. And that maybe even includes going the day before and make peace that you might end up, if you're living on the coast, you might occasionally just spend a couple hours sitting at the ferry terminal waiting for a boat for reasons that are beyond your control, that it's busy or a boat breaks down or there's a storm or whatever it is. There is that part of it. But I think for most people that aren't commuting daily back and forth to the city, the ferries is not a big issue to deal with, a big obstacle to overcome to live on the coast. My
tip is to pack snack and water or treats or something like that. Because if you're waiting at one end or another, I don't know, food's always a good thing to have. And sometimes depending if it's an early sailing or sometimes stuff's not open or you're parked way up top.
And sometimes you're just in a spot where it's a long enough wait for the boat that you get peckish and you wish you had a drink, especially if it's hot. But it's close enough to the sailing that you don't think you can walk into Horseshoe Bay and get a drink or a meal or something like that. And so you're kind of chained to your car.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a really good idea, I think, to take a little bit of sustenance with you when you're waiting for the ferry.
Sunshine, sunshine.